All right, so today we're talking about planting beans. And beginning of summer, it's still May, but great time to plant beans. And I am growing on a small farm scale here, but a lot of the same tips and techniques apply. You can make a furrow using the wheel hoe I demonstrated before, or this is one of my favorite farm tools, just a simple eye hoe, and you can make a furrow by holding it at a 45-degree angle, and you can see that's every bit as good as the one with my tool. And then you can use this for covering it up. You can use it for weeding, all sorts of things. And I've had this tool for 30 years. I don't even think I've replaced the handle. And when I've traveled around the world, this is what farmers use all over the place. Interestingly enough, in the Andes, you can see this has an angle of roughly 90 degrees, but in the Andes where it's really steep, they'll have ones that are like this because you're standing on a steep hill, and they custom make them for crazy steep farming. But here we have mostly level ground. Today I'm planting a beautiful pole bean that my friend Alan Adesi brought back from Greece, and this is called Zargana of Nestos. So I imagine Nestos is a place in Greece. And these make these beautiful pink-purple pods on a plant with a pole habit. So an important distinction you need to understand if you're growing beans, is it a bush bean or a pole bean? So what I'm doing here on my beds that are about 3 feet wide, I'm going to grow pole beans here, and then I'll use T-posts and trellising material, and those will climb up that. And then over here, I'm going to plant a bush bean. If I planted pole beans on both sides, once they're tall, there'd be no way for me to weed, or it would be difficult to pick the middle. So here's a little technique I figured out. You can also grow pole beans on corn. Once your corn's a couple inches high, you can just plant it next to the corn and it'll grow up it. Or you can grow it on like a bean teepee. Take some bamboo or other kind of poles and tie them together like a teepee. And you might need to add some trellising string, but that's fun, especially if you have kids. You can make it so they can go inside, and that works real well. So here, beans, if you're growing them on a pole, then you can plant them pretty close together, like 2 inches, because they're going to go vertically. And they're not going to grow completely vertical. They'll ramble a little bit, but they make just one stem. They're not branching. Whereas bush beans, you plant about 2 to 4 inches, and they can kind of grow together, and that actually helps hold them together, but they don't make any tendrils. Whereas pole beans don't make tendrils like a squash that grab onto things, but they twist. And an interesting fact, due to the Coriolis force that exists at the equator, vining materials in the northern hemisphere go clockwise, and in the southern hemisphere they go anti-clockwise. So if you're helping your plant trellis, you need to remember that, because you don't want to confuse it, because it's not going to comply with that. So without further ado, I'm going to just take some by hand and just sprinkle them in my furrow, approximating about planting every 2 to 4 inches. And beans, you want to plant about 1 to 2 inches deep, so you're planting them to moisture, because you can even see in the soil the surface is dried out here, but deep down where I made a furrow, the soil is darker, and you can tell the moisture is there. So planting them deep enough so they have, because you don't want to water too much, because you might rot your seed. And if you overwater, you're going to get a lot of weeds coming up. So a lot of our traditional ancestor farmers, homesteaders, gardeners didn't have pressurized sprinklers. So they would plant to moisture and wait for it to come up. And I have some colleagues that have a thing called the Dry Farming Institute, and they will plant certain beans and corn and squash and melons that they've figured out work well for dry farming. They'll water it once. And here in Oregon, we might not get any rain in June, July, or August in a normal year. And they managed to get it to work. And it'd be interesting to know, like, if you plant it deeper, because that's the farmers down in the desert Southwest, the various Pueblo tribes, the Hopi, the Dene, they would plant seed 10 to 12 inches deep down to moisture. But here our soil is a heavy clay, so the seed would rot. It wouldn't work there. But find the people in your area that know about this. I just know what works here. So I plant about 1 to 2 inches deep. So you can see I've got a spacing of about 3 or 4 inches, probably on average here. If you go too fast, I find you tend to plant too thick, or you have gaps. And you know, like a lot of things in life, if it's worth doing right. So that's about good there. I'll leave the seed there and finish later, but I can show covering it up now. And so I'm using my hoe, and this is where having some degree of control decides, are you planting it 1 inch deep, 2 inches deep? And I'm not too worried. The bigger the seed, the easier time they have pushing up through the soil. If this was carrots, you'd want to be very careful, because if you plant them too deep, they're just not going to come up. These beans will eventually push up through the soil, but if they're too deep down, the soil might be cold. And that reminds me of an important consideration I haven't brought up, is that beans, like corn or any other heat-loving crop, needs a soil temperature of about 70 degrees. So here, yesterday it was 86 degrees. Last night it got down to about 50. So the average of those two is about what the soil is. So it might warm up during the day. Like if I put my hand on the soil, it's warm to the touch. But if I go down in here where it's cool to the touch. And we're just talking about a distance there. But if the seed is deep down, it's dealing with that. And so one way to think about your soil is it's like a thermal battery. And if your soil's too wet, the seed will rot, because basically warm temperatures is going to help that seed to grow faster. But cool temperatures, it's going to be slow. And if it might sprout in cool soil, but if it's growing too slowly, you know, various microorganisms and things in the soil will be eating that plant before it's a quick growing, robust plant. And until it gets its leaves up out of the soil, it's not acquiring any light, which is food for the plant. And so, well, but you can do this pretty fast. And, you know, this is how the vast majority of gardeners, small farmers around the world are planting beans, is a simple tool like this. Once you get good at it, you can watch how I can go along and do this even faster. And maybe we'll do a video someday about the biomechanics of farming. So right now, I have my right hand here. When I do that one, I should probably switch to my left hand to get your body, because you do these twists. And that's one thing that I think, you know, some folks don't realize is we just favor one side. But all this stuff is like doing yoga, you know, or whether you're chopping. And so thinking about how to move your body efficiently in the field is really worth thinking about. Otherwise, you're going to have a sore back. So I'm going to leave that there, come back and finish up later, and we'll go look at some beans that are growing already. So I'm here in my home garden. Even though we have a farm, we still have a little home garden where we grow crops that we aren't growing otherwise for food. And I'm next to some beans here, some bean plants that I planted probably, I would guess this was 2 weeks to 20 days ago. And these are bush beans for snap beans. And you can even see an interesting thing about beans, I'll get my shadow out of the light, is they're what's called a dicot. So you can see the cotyledons on this little seedling here still. And so those are what are called the seed leaves. And you can see it's basically like a bean that opens, and then the true leaves, so these are the plant's first true leaves, pop out. And I've got some weeds in here. But I'll go and dig up one just so you can see kind of what the plants look like down in there. Maybe let's do one. And then put these guys back in. So beans are typically a direct seeded crop. And so here's a bean seedling. And look at how the cotyledons are way up here. It already grew this whole stem, and then the roots are down here. Because what happens is the plant sprouts from the seed, and it sends a shoot up towards the light, and then the radicle is actually the botanical term, which is the roots down lower. And So, those being kind of planted down to moisture is useful. So let's say I planted these 20 days ago. Over here, I just planted some the other day. And when you're a new gardener, this can be a useful technique. And it kind of goes into the Ralph Waldo Emerson quote of, "I have great faith in a seed. If you tell me a seed is planted there, I'm expected to witness wonders." And Jake's making a cameo appearance here. But, right here, you can't see anything. I just planted a few days ago here. But I'm going to dig down. Let's say you're like, oh, my beans aren't sprouting. I can get down in here and I can see, well, what's happening? Okay, so there's some weeds in here. Look at, here's some kind of weed that sprouted in there. I'm looking for sprouted beans. I haven't found any yet. But it can be instructive just to see, okay, here's one. There we go. So in a couple days, because we've had warm temperatures, look. And so this is also a good lesson from the plant. What happened first? It grew the root first. And notice how it has taproot going down because it's going to moisture. And then it has these more fibrous lateral roots growing. And the cotyledons are still here in the bean. This looks like a provider bean. And then eventually that will push a shoot up. So I'm going to put that guy back down there. So if you're doubting what's happening, but here, look at that one. That one hasn't sprouted at all. So maybe it will. We just need to be patient. But you want to do successive planting. So we're going to be eating these. Beans are typically a 50 to 60 day crop. So if we planted this 20 days ago, in about 30 days, we're going to have the first snap beans here. Then, we'll be harvesting these and eating these. Then these ones will happen. And then somewhere else, I've got to find space to do another planting in about 2 to 3 weeks so that you have a continual supply. And then when you notice, like these plants, when they're done, you rip them out and you put them in the compost. Or if you have animals like cows, sheep, pigs, goats, you could give them the plants. They'd be happy to eat the leaves or the over-mature pods. Or if you wanted to save your own seed, beans are among the easier things if you want to start a seed-saving journey because they do not cross-pollinate. They're self-pollinated. So you can let them go. You let the beans go over-mature to the point the pods are dry. And then you pick those off and you save the seed and you have your own seed forever if you keep doing that. So another important consideration about beans when you think about crop rotation is that they're a nitrogen-fixing plant because they're in the legume plant family, which is actually known as the Fabaceae in the Latin term. So by planting these here, I am basically putting nitrogen from the air in the soil, whereas over here I've got cabbages and cauliflowers, which are a plant that wants nitrogen. And maybe the timing will work out is that these cauliflowers are making their head. We harvest it, rip out the plants, and plant more beans in here. And then another nitrogen-fixing plant related to beans, and these are ones I planted really early in the year, in February. These are fava beans, and you can see them flowering now, and then eventually they'll be making pods. So thinking about crop rotation, and beans are a great thing. If you have an empty space in your garden, throw in some more beans. And if you have too much, you can give them to a friend or pickle them or let them go to seed and have your own. They're really one of the easier things to grow and definitely should be on your list for things to start growing if you're a new gardener. Both of these are a bush bean I planted over here, so I don't need to think about trellising, and they tend to be quicker to maturity. So I mentioned about 50 to 60 days on average. Obviously, it depends on the temperature and your fertility, whereas pole beans are more of a 70 to 80 day crop, but you get much more beans. And in talking to old timers, people who have been gardening for decades, they say they taste better. So I notice when I'm selling seed at the farmer's market, anyone over 70, they only want to plant pole beans because it reminds them of the flavor of true beans. Whereas all the bush beans are more modern varieties because if you're just buying beans at the supermarket, those are all bush beans. And bush beans can be mechanically harvested, but there's no way to mechanically harvest pole beans. So I think you should grow some of both so you can learn yourself. But also, there's something to that old-time wisdom of the ones that taste better and harken back to plants that our great-grandparents grew and ate. And that's about all there is to beans. They're pretty simple.